China has watched India for decades, but something changed, something fundamental.
You can get there, no matter. And you can get there, no matter. That's our commander. We can get there, no matter. That I will clarify from my commander.
And it's not what you think. It forced Beijing to rethink its entire military calculus. It wasn't India's economy. It wasn't the border. It wasn't even nuclear weapons. It's something much more strategic, something that shifted the entire balance of power in Asia. And once you understand it, you will never look at this rivalry the same way again. Let's break it down. For over 2,000 years, India and China avoided large-scale war. It wasn't for a lack of contact. Chinese travelers like Xuanzang and Faxian made extraordinary journeys across the mountains to reach India, seeking Buddhist scriptures and knowledge. There was intellectual and spiritual exchange. Cultural bridges were built. But cultural exchange is not the same as military projection. The real reason for the absence of war is geography, specifically the Himalayas. Between these two ancient empires stood the highest mountain range on Earth, a massive, freezing, impassable wall of rock and ice, the roof of the world. You don't march an army across that. You don't supply troops through those passes. You don't project power over those mountains unless you absolutely have to. And behind that wall lay the Tibetan Plateau, an even more unforgiving expanse of altitude and cold. Together, they formed a layered geopolitical shock absorber. Two massive civilizations, separated by the deadliest terrain on Earth. They had cultural ties, but they couldn't fight each other even if they wanted to. The sheer physical impossibility of projecting power across this terrain enforced a stable, albeit distant, equilibrium. For 2 millennia, the Himalayas kept large-scale war off the table. But maps change. And when maps change, strategic assumptions change with them. For roughly 2 millennia, the civilizations of India and China had extensive contact, but generally did not share a direct political border, because Tibet separated them. In the mid-20th century, the map was redrawn. As Chinese control over Tibet consolidated through the 1950s, that massive buffer vanished. A civilizational frontier became a direct, disputed land border. 2 Asian giants, previously separated by the roof of the world, were now sharing a fence. Yes, India recognized Tibet as part of China in 1954. That was a sovereign diplomatic choice. But diplomatic recognition doesn't change physical geography. The physical buffer vanished the moment China consolidated control, and that fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. The 1962 war wasn't an anomaly. It wasn't a random flare-up. It was a predictable consequence, the direct result of 2 powers suddenly occupying the same neighborhood without a wall between them. Geography is a powerful constraint, and when you remove the buffer, you don't get peace. You get a pressure cooker. 1962 was the steam escaping. The border was contested. The memory of that war lingered. But for decades, there was still a kind of equilibrium. Both sides understood their limitations. India couldn't reach China's heartland. China couldn't easily project power into India. That equilibrium held for 50 years. Then technology changed the equation. Everyone assumes China's strategic shift started when India tested nuclear weapons in 1974. That's the standard narrative. It's the easy answer. And it overlooks the crucial detail. The truth is, China didn't lose sleep over those early nukes. Not really. Why? Because having a nuclear bomb is one thing. Having a way to deliver it to your adversary's strategic heartland is another. India's early nuclear weapons could reach Pakistan. They could not reach Beijing. China understood this. The strategic calculus remained stable. The real shift didn't happen in 1974. It happened in 2012. That's when India fired the Agni-V, range over 5,000 kilometers. Suddenly, India could reach China's strategic core. Beijing, Shanghai, the industrial heartland, the military command centers. Now here is where most analysts stop. They say nuclear deterrence, mutually assured destruction. Nobody will use nukes, and they are right. Nuclear war is a threshold nobody wants to cross. It's a doomsday button. But here's what they miss. Here's the real variable that compelled a strategic reassessment in Beijing. A 5,000-kilometer missile doesn't need a declared conventional role to be terrifying. The mere existence of this reach creates a nightmare of strategic ambiguity for Beijing. India now possesses the undeniable ability to hold China's strategic depth at risk, complicating every military calculation they make. Think about that. India can now project power across the Himalayas. It can strike Chinese assets deep inside its own territory. It can impose strategic costs conventionally and repeatedly, without crossing the nuclear threshold. China cannot pursue a conventional military option against India without factoring in the risk of conventional missile strikes on its own soil. India now possesses a credible, conventional deterrent that operates independently of mutually assured destruction. And the strategic recalculation isn't limited to the Himalayas. It extends to China's maritime backyard, when India started exporting BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles. To the Philippines and Indonesia, Beijing had to take note. The BrahMos reaches the South China Sea. It reaches the Malacca Strait. It arms China's neighbors with a weapon designed to challenge naval assets. But here's the real point, and it's not about scale. Scale isn't the point, diplomatic cost is the point. For 40 years, China armed Pakistan with zero global pushback. It was a free flow. No one stopped them. But now, when China complains about India arming Southeast Asia, the world says, you armed Pakistan for 40 years. Now the strategic logic has reversed. Beijing faces a brutal diplomatic trap. The exact logic it used to justify arming Pakistan for 40 years is the exact logic India is now using in the South China Sea. The world sees the hypocrisy, and Beijing knows it. The chessboard has expanded. Beijing cannot focus all its energy on the Himalayas anymore. It has to watch its own waters. That is the real strategic recalculation. Not just the missile that reaches Beijing, the partnerships that reach its naval periphery and its regional ambitions. You don't dismiss a neighbor who can strengthen your rivals, complicate your maritime operations, and reach your strategic depth, all while staying below the nuclear threshold. That's why China was prompted to rethink India. Not the nukes, but the reach. So, where does this leave us? Two nuclear-armed Asian powers with a disputed border. One has developed the ability to strike the other's heartland conventionally. Both recognize that full-scale military confrontation carries prohibitive costs. And let's be clear, miscalculation is possible. The 1962 war happened. Galwan happened in 2020. The risk is real. But here's the remarkable thing about Galwan. In June 2020, at an altitude of 470 meters, Indian and Chinese soldiers clashed with iron rods, rocks, and bare hands. At least 20 soldiers died. It was the deadliest confrontation in decades. But not a single shot was fired. Why? In 1993, they signed the agreement on the maintenance of peace and tranquility along the line of actual control. In 1996, they added the agreement on confidence building measures in the military field along the line of actual control. Together, they created a framework that has held for decades. Under these agreements, both sides are prohibited from firing guns or detonating explosives within 2 kilometers of the line of actual control. The soldiers on both sides carry firearms, but they are bound by a framework of restraint forged by decades of agreements and the absolute, terrifying calculus of escalation that forbids their use. For 45 years, from 1975 to 2020, the India-China border was completely free of gunfire. Two nuclear-armed powers with a disputed border stretching over 3,000 kilometers maintained 45 years of silence along the guns. Not because they trusted each other, not because the border was settled, but because both sides made a choice. Compare this to the United States. Washington has withdrawn from arms control treaties. It has initiated military action without UN authorization. It has violated its own agreements. When the US wants something, it often uses force first and justifies it later. India and China, they stand face to face on the world's highest battlefield, and they choose not to pull the trigger. The 1993 and 1996 agreements are not just pieces of paper. They are a framework of restraint that soldiers on both sides take seriously. That is not strategy wrapped in sentiment. That is strategy enforced by the absolute unforgiving calculus of escalation. A full-scale war between India and China wouldn't be a battlefield victory for anyone. It would be economic self-sabotage. China needs its coastal industrial base. India needs its growing supply chains. A major conflict would destabilize the global economy and create opportunities for external powers to exploit the aftermath. Neither Delhi nor Beijing wants to become a theater for great power interference. So they don't stop competing, they just change the arena. The next phase of this rivalry won't feature tank battles or aerial dogfights. That's 20th century thinking. The 21st century rivalry is fought in the gray zones. It's border skirmishes with batons and rocks like Galwan. It's upstream dams that affect downstream water security. It's supply chain diversification, semiconductor restrictions, and a competition for digital infrastructure across the global south. It's cyber operations and diplomatic influence campaigns. A battle for alignment among developing nations. But underneath it all, the framework holds. Two civilizations that once sent monks across the Himalayas to seek wisdom now send soldiers to the same mountains, and they choose not to pull the trigger, not out of kindness, out of cold, hard calculation. They don't refuse to fire because they are wise. They refuse to fire because the calculus of escalation is absolute. And in geopolitics, calculation is the only thing that holds the line. The buffer is gone. The deterrent is set. The shadow war is here. India and China aren't just neighbors anymore. They are rivals, engaged in a long-term strategic recalibration. The era of enforced geographic separation is over. Technology has rewritten the rules of engagement. I called this video, Why China Was Forced to Rethink India. That doesn't mean Beijing is panicking. It means Beijing is adapting, as any great power would when new variables enter the equation. And in geopolitics, adaptation is the ultimate acknowledgement of a shifting balance. If you want to understand the world as it actually is, not as you wish it to be, pull up a chair and subscribe. The arguments are sharp, but the handshake is genuine. I'll see you in the next one.